everybody, and welcome back to Vlog Talk. So a lot of things have happened in this past little bit. My significant and I decided that we should pack up all of our things, pack up the birds, and drive all the way from Vancouver to Winnipeg. Instead of standing here making a whole video apologizing about not making videos, it just kind of made more sense to jump right back into it again. So today we're going to talk a little bit about our move from BC to Manitoba and kind of things you guys can do to make sure that moves are a little more relaxing and comfortable for your birds if you happen to decide to drive for 3 days across Canada. So before you actually start moving, the first thing you should think about is where you're going. You want to make sure that the place you're headed to has a certified avian veterinarian, that it's going to be someone you can get access to, that they're accepting new patients, because you don't want to move somewhere and then find out that your pets won't be able to have proper veterinary care. Parrots can't just see a regular vet. Everything about them is different, right down to the shape of their blood cells. They need a veterinarian that is trained on birds to properly treat them. Taking them and moving them somewhere totally random without thinking ahead of time on whether or not there's going to be someone there that can give them proper vet care is not going to end too well for them. If something ever did happen where they had to get sick, or you just need to take them for the annual exams and you find out that there's nowhere you can take them, it's going to be pretty heart-wrenching and it's going to be very difficult to actually provide proper care to your birds. Other things you want to look into about the areas you're headed to, maybe things like their water quality, their produce, the way things are produced, because if you're bringing a bird into a new area, you may find that the mineral contents in the water or the water purification that they use might not be safest for your birds. A lot of birds can be quite sensitive to changes like that. And Newt in particular, when we actually traveled from BC to here, the change in humidity actually caused him to be dehydrated. When we brought him here for his first vet check, which was a couple days after we moved in, he was really dehydrated. The vet was trying to do a simple blood draw on him and he ended up having to go into an incubator just because the stress of moving and the change in humidity had made it very, very stressful on his body. So the tiniest little things like the humidity and the climate and whether or not the water has certain minerals in it can impact their health quite greatly. You want to make sure you do in-depth research on where you're going so you can know what kind of things to look out for. With Newt and his dehydration, after going to the vet and seeing that this had happened to him, Mia was fine, but he was just a little bit more sensitive. So we have to make sure he gets plenty of baths. We've actually had to start giving them purified water instead of just tap water, because his system just couldn't handle the change. So they get their own special bird water while the rest of us drink out of the tap. When it comes to actually traveling, you need to make sure you're prepared. Before Jack and I actually got up and moved here, we had a very thorough plan on where the cages were going to go. We went and bought new travel cages, how we were going to stop, how we were going to make sure everyone was getting plenty of out of cage time, how to ensure their safety. Before you actually get in the vehicle and start going, you want to make sure that you thoroughly think all of these things through, so that way when you're driving, you're not all of a sudden in a panic going over things that you didn't think about before you actually left. When it comes to driving across the country, you don't only need to worry about them and the stress it's going to take on them. Driving across Canada was exhausting. It was very hard on the body. When we first left, we left in the middle of the night. So I was tired. I was the only one out of the two of us that could drive, so we couldn't even switch. And as much as I was worried about them, I'm lucky I had Jack there because she was worried about me and I wasn't paying attention to my own health. And it actually hit a point where we had to stop because I'd given myself like vertigo. I would stop and the road was just still moving. And because I was so worried about making sure that we got to our final destination in a timely manner, I didn't think about my health and the impact it could have on them. Because if I'm driving and I'm pushing myself too hard, I could have gotten us into an accident, we could have ended up somewhere that we weren't supposed to be, and we could have ended up causing a lot more stress and a lot more damage than needed if I had taken the time to slow down and breathe and take lots of breaks. When you're on the road, it feels like you have to get there, and you kind of forget that getting there as fast as possible may not be the least stressful solution. What we ended up doing was about every hour, every 2 hours, we'd pull over at the side of the road and we'd stop. It didn't really matter where we were. Taking those breaks and making sure that you're stopping, not only for checking up on the birds, letting them out, making sure that they have the capacity to kind of spread their wings and feel comfortable, but also just for your sake, giving yourself a bit of a mental break. Even if you're not the driver, it's still exhausting sitting in a cramped car, driving 100 miles an hour, and hoping that you're going to make it there on time. You want to make sure that you're making the car as comfortable of a place as possible. In a lot of situations, you may be able to pre-plan what you're going to do. Come here. Good boy. With Newt and Mia, we knew ahead of time that we were going to be moving, so we were able to get them in the car a month in advance and start taking them on car rides. They'd be in their travel cages, we'd just sit them in the vehicle, we'd let them out in the vehicle, let them get comfortable with it before we actually started driving and going anywhere. Then we just do like a lap around the block, we'd drive for a little bit and stop at a park. You know, we'd have fun with it. We'd make sure that the birds were comfortable and relaxed and just do a bunch of these really tiny short drives. This way the birds were used to being in a moving vehicle. They were used to going in and out of their travel cages. They knew that they were going to come back home, that they weren't getting sent off somewhere. In this way, it wasn't a huge stressful event when it actually came to driving for 3 days straight, because the whole month beforehand, basically every day, every other day, they were getting in the truck and they were going for a short drive somewhere. They knew that it was a positive experience because they'd get lots of treats, and it was a way to help them feel a lot more calm, a lot more relaxed when it actually came to the final move. Now, in a lot of cases, you may not know that you're doing these things ahead of time. You may be a week before something and not have a full month to actually fully prepare for a great big move. In those cases, you want to make sure that you're still giving them as positive an experience as possible. Having your birds trained to go into their travel cages willingly is a huge help. Once they're in their travel cage, it's a place that they know is safe, it's a place that they're comfortable with. It's going to be something that makes it a lot easier for you to pick them up and move them, as opposed to the day of the move when you're chasing your bird around the room trying to throw them into a travel cage, and then they're already stressed out because you just crammed them into a cage. They're stressed out because they've probably never been in the cage before, and now they're randomly outside and they don't know why. It's a lot of stressors that are going to make this whole move a lot harder on them, when you could just take the time to slowly introduce them to the travel cage and have that entire stressful situation completely gone. When it comes to actually getting in the car and going, every single bird will be different. Some might be terrified of the window, some might be scared of noises. You have to kind of play it by ear. You have to watch your bird's body language. If you can get those car rides in before the actual trip, it will be a huge help in showing you the things that scare them and the things that don't. So because every single bird will be different, I can't really be of too much help here. You kind of really have to learn about your bird and the things that scare them and the things that don't. For my guys, I really thought the window was going to scare them. Mia's a very anxious bird, and seeing things fly by her at home often terrifies her. So I thought that she would prefer having the window covered with a blanket, or having one of those suction cup baby window protector things over the car window. But she actually really enjoyed looking out the window, and we ended up hanging a little atom in front of the window so that way she could sit on it and look outside when we were stopped or if we were in a really quiet neighborhood. Every bird's going to be different in this case. You can also cover the travel cage. You can leave just the front open so they can still see you and they don't feel totally closed off, but you can cover the sides so they aren't looking out the two side windows and getting freaked out. Just be aware of your bird and kind of see if they prefer the window or if they don't. Another common thing that tends to terrify birds is noises. For this reason, playing a radio can be a huge help. It doesn't really matter if your bird shows a lot of preference towards a certain type of music or anything like that. It's really more background noise to help keep them occupied and not having sudden startling noises. For a lot of birds, thank you, a car honking its horn or a crow cawing right outside the window can be quite startling, and it can scare them, especially when they have no control over where they're going. So playing some background music kind of helps blend all those noises together and gives them something else to focus on. It doesn't really matter what kind of music you play. If your bird shows a preference, go with it. But you can play whatever you enjoy, and it'll kind of help hide the noises of the environment around you and can help make everything a lot less stressful. When it comes to what you're actually transporting your bird in, like the kind of travel cage they're in, it isn't super important. Like, it doesn't matter what color it is or what it's really made of. But when it comes to driving in a car, if you know that you're going to be going a long distance and you're going to be on really busy highways and there is a potential for an accident to occur, you want that cage to be secure. It has to be buckled in. You want it to be strong enough to withstand any sort of damage. You want them to be safe. I wouldn't recommend traveling in something that's a weak, tiny finch cage where the bars are, a couple millimeters thick, and if they were to get hit, the whole cage would crumple. You want it to be a good, strong, secure cage. The one I used for Newt was actually the King's Cage's travel cage. The whole thing can clip together and dismantle, and it is extremely sturdy. So if something had happened when we were driving and we got sideswiped, I know his cage would have stayed intact and he would be safe. Now, you don't by any means have to use that travel cage. It's just something to keep in mind that you want to check the thickness of the bars. You want to make sure it's going to be strong. You want to make sure it's going to fit in your vehicle. If it fits nicely on the seat, you can get a seat belt around it. You can secure it firmly to your car. You want them to be as secure as possible when you're driving halfway across the country. Make sure you bring enough of the necessities with you. Weird things happen on road trips. Weird things happen when you're moving. Stuff you had in your hand 2 minutes ago will suddenly vanish. So make sure you come fully prepared and you bring plenty. Just because you've put enough food in their dish to last them the whole trip doesn't mean it's still going to be there in 2 hours. Newt decided that he didn't like being in his travel cage very much after the first hour or so, so he started grabbing his food bowl and throwing it. So we had to make sure we had an extra bag of pellets readily available for him for when he decided he was going to throw his food everywhere. Same thing goes for the water. You want to make sure that they have enough. You want to make sure you have an extra water bottle for when, they sit over it, they accidentally poop in it, or they throw food in it. You want to make sure you have a clean supply for them. The same thing goes for vet supplies. Make sure you keep some quick stuff on you. Make sure you keep a little bit of vegetable oil on you in case something happens. You want to make sure you have the basics of a first aid kit for them, just in case something goes wrong. You never know what they're going to manage to do in a travel cage when they're left to their own devices. Weird things will happen, and you want to make sure you're prepared for every last one that you can be. When it comes to traveling with your birds, it can be very tempting just to let them out of the vehicle while you're driving. You feel bad that they're in a confined space. They might be lashing out because they're in a confined space. You really just want to let them out and let them stretch their wings. Please be careful where you are and what you're doing. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean that letting them out in a moving vehicle is the best idea. If you get into an accident while they're out, or they decide to misbehave and they're clambering all over you while you're driving, you're going to be distracted. It's not going to be safe. If you're on a highway, you're going well over 100 miles an hour. It's not the safest thing to be doing. And although you may feel bad that they're in a confined space, it's going to feel a whole lot worse if you get into an accident and lose your bird. If you're in a really small town, or you can pull over every hour, yes, it'll make your trips take a little longer, but it's going to be a lot safer for them and for you. Just because it's tempting to let them out and keep moving doesn't mean it's the best thing to be doing. Take the trip slow. Make sure you give them plenty of time to get out, pull over, make sure all the windows are closed, and give them an extra little bit of time. You could even take a little power nap and let them out while you have someone else in the car watching them. Just make sure you're careful about it, and don't let the stress of the trip block your sights from what's going to be safest for them. One of the most critical things about traveling with a bird is making sure that they're legal everywhere that you go. In a lot of places in the States, there's a lot of birds that are prohibited. You can't travel them through certain states, and it can be the same way in Canada. We didn't have that issue, thankfully, when we were driving across, but there were some really weird laws that we didn't know about until we were there. When we passed through Saskatchewan, we were trying to find a hotel to stay in so we could let the birds out. They were all pet friendly, but because their protocols didn't specify birds, a lot of the places were rejecting us. They would accept fish and lizards and dogs and cats, but because it didn't specify that a bird was allowed and it wasn't recognized in their facility, we weren't allowed to stay at like 10 different hotels that we had called. And because we didn't think about that beforehand, we thought pet friendly, if you accept a dog, you should accept a bird. We thought it would be fine. But because it wasn't specific in their protocol, it was very difficult for us to find a place to stay. Thankfully we did, and when we did, both my significant and I ended up just crying. And we were exhausted. We had driven for 24 hours straight, and we just wanted somewhere to lay down and sleep, and knowing that we had no idea whether or not we were going to find somewhere was extremely stressful and poor planning on our part. So maybe be a little smarter than I was and maybe pre-plan your hotels and where you're gonna be. That being said, we didn't do it that way because we didn't know how long it was going to take us. We didn't know how long we were going to get from point A to point B, and if we could even book the hotel ahead of time and make sure we were going to be there. So it's kind of a little bit of hit and miss, but that's something to be aware of that I didn't know of until we did it. So if anyone's passing through Saskatchewan with birds, just be aware that a lot of hotels might not take you because they don't recognize birds as an accepted animal in hotels. So when you finally reach your destination, you can be really excited to let your birds out. They've been trapped in a cage this whole time. You just want to let them out and be done with it. This whole thing's been exhausting, but please be careful with it. When you get to your new location, make sure you take the time to bird-proof the area. Make sure you take the time to check all the little nooks and crannies. We got this guy into a new bird room and we were all like, yay, he has his own space. We can put them in there while we move the rest of our stuff in. Turns out he could fit his body under the door, and he crammed himself under and got out into the house, and it was like, he was fine. It wasn't an issue. Everything was done at that point, but it was just kind of like, really, man, like we're trying to do some other stuff and get everything moved in so we can simmer and settle and relax, and he goes and crams himself under a door and starts wreaking havoc. Do make sure you give your bird plenty of time to properly settle in. Just because they're with you and they feel safe with you doesn't mean that letting them out in the new house right away is the best idea, especially if they are a more nervous bird. They may need a little bit more time to sit in their travel cage and relax and kind of take in the new surroundings before they finally decide that they feel safe enough to come out and explore. If you let a bird out and they're scared, especially if they're stressed or they've changed altitudes, they've changed humidities, they need time to adapt to the area. If you let them out and they're under all those stresses and changes, they can end up flying into something, they can end up hurting themselves because they're stressed, they might be lightheaded, and then they'll panic and they'll fly, and that will raise their heart rate, they'll have even more lightheadedness, and it's just kind of asking for a disaster. So as excited as you may be about finally reaching your destination, leave them in their cages for a little bit longer. Make sure they're properly settled, make sure their body language is calm. Have them in a small enclosed room first before letting them go everywhere else. Just make sure you give them the time to properly feel comfortable in the house, not just comfortable with you. So that's gonna about do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video kind of helped and gave you a couple little things you may not have considered before traveling with your little feathered companion in a vehicle. If you've got any other suggestions or any of you guys have gone on road trips with your birds, I'd love to hear about how it went and all the sorts of little tips and tricks that you guys use to help make your birds comfortable and have a good time in the car. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.